It's difficult because I haven't healed. I'm very much a different person than I was before this happened. Anybody who knows who I was before and who I am now will tell you I'm very, very different. Um, I actually just hung out with an old friend of mine the other day, and he asked what I wanted to drink, and I said water. He goes, "Oh, you quit drinking?" I says, "No, I just don't do it much anymore. Not even in my free time, not on weekends. Even sometimes when I go out with friends, I stick with water. Um, I just, I, and I rarely ever go out with friends anymore. I go to work and I stay home. It's hard because it changes who you are as a person. It changes how you view the world. A big piece of who you are is buried with your child. As you said, it's you bury a piece of yourself.
That's Stacia Schnoor, the mother of Sabrina Lee Schnoor, a domestic violence victim in Minnesota who was murdered by her boyfriend. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. In our last episode with Stacia, we discussed Sabrina's life. In this episode, we go deeper into the case and the trial and some of the advocacy that Stacia wants to do and that her family has taken on in the wake of their loss. In part 2, we're going to dive back into the story, but I want to take a moment to remind you of who Sabrina was. Sabrina Schnoor was born in 1998 in Mankato, Minnesota. She attended the local school district and graduated from Owatonna High School. She was the kind of girl and woman who enjoyed camping, all sorts of music, being in nature, and fishing with her grandfather. Sabrina's family said she was obsessed with animals of all kinds, motorcycles, tattoos, and loved walking her dog more than most. She had hoped that someday she would become an artist, working on tattoos for people within her community. Sabrina had a young son named Daniel, who would become the center of her life by the time she was 25 years old. In 2025, Sabrina's friend, Terry Lynn Prestigard, joined us to discuss Sabrina's life as a loving mom who cherished her son, her creativity, and joyful, goofy spirit. As someone who is hard to forget and the type of person always willing to see the best in people. But underneath it all, Sabrina was carrying a secret that only a handful of people knew. She was in a relationship with a 38-year-old man named Jason Lee Horner that was marred with domestic violence. People say that it takes an average of 7 times to get out of a relationship that involves domestic violence. And Sabrina was ready, having recently separated from Horner in a more permanent way than before. We, as the friends, family members, neighbors who hear through the walls, and coworkers who struggle with what we see, have a hard time finding the words, ways to encourage, how to be accepting, how to not give ultimatums to a person who's already receiving so many ultimatums. Sabrina hid from her friends that she was going to meet Horner to take a walk with him before Horner, who is known in the community for his past abusive relationships with other women, was headed off to prison on another charge. He had threatened to kill Sabrina before. He had threatened to kill himself as well. Sabrina never returned from that walk. On May 29, she was last seen with Horner. The next day, her body was found. In court, Horner's attorneys argued that Sabrina found a gun on their walk and killed herself in an accidental discharge. Prosecutors argued that Horner had placed the gun on their path, sensing that Sabrina was pulling away, and executed her underneath a highway bridge after knocking her unconscious, sticking the gun into her mouth, and firing. In the last year since Terry came on, Horner's case made its way through an 11-day trial, and a Steele County, Minnesota jury, after 7 hours of deliberation, found him guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, first-degree manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, and illegal possession of a firearm. Horner's now been sentenced to 18 years in prison, but under Minnesota law, Horner will be incarcerated for only 12 years, minus time already served. And if he does not commit any more disciplinary violations, he'll serve an additional 6 years on supervised release. Today, we're going to speak with Sabrina's mother, Stacia Schnoor. Stacia raised Sabrina, loved her, and sat through the trial. Stacia also created the Sabrina Lee Foundation, which is dedicated to attempting to prevent domestic violence and change laws in Minnesota and beyond. Sabrina's family and friends said that she did not have to die that way, that if police and prosecutors had done their jobs right in the past and taken Horner, a serial abuser, off the streets, he would not have had the chance to kill Sabrina and leave her son orphaned. Horner has been arrested and charged with multiple domestic violence incidents, which all resulted in plea deals and light sentences. We discussed Sabrina's life and her death, the ripple effects that have reverberated, domestic violence, navigating the criminal justice system, and the things that friends can do when the people that they care about are facing domestic violence. I know that, it sounds like you had a good idea of what happened in the first days. And it sounds like, she was found relatively soon in comparison. How were what were the initial stages of the investigation like? And I bring this up because I think that those of us who are on the outside of, let's say, being a victim don't really always understand what it's like to be on the other side, to be the one who's going through anguish and looking for answers. And I know for law enforcement, their fidelity, is like one detective put for me, is that, their job is to avenge the dead, right? But sometimes that means keeping information away from the people who are closest to them, or communication isn't always good, even though it can be. But I wonder what the initial stages of the investigation felt like for you.
After the immediate trauma of it all, and I let out everything I needed, I kind of went back into robotic mode and dealt with investigators and detectives and coroners and, unfortunately, news media, and who definitely got several earfuls from me. Um, I ended up
And I
becoming
think,
very
by the
close
way,
with one of them because of it. But it was,
hey, sometimes some tough feedback will create a bond.
yeah, it did. But it was actually, I have to say, the investigators, the detectives and stuff, after I initially talked to them after, we had confirmed it was her and everything, they kept me very up to date on what was going on. Um, I did not share a lot of the information because much of it we didn't want shared yet as the investigation was going. So there were certain things that we did not release to the public, but they were very good at keeping me up to date on everything that was happening. And of course, I would share it with my immediate family, but we didn't share it beyond that, just
And
because we didn't want to do anything that could jeopardize the investigation. Um,
yeah. And it's small community relatively, so
mhm.
word could get
Well,
around.
and it didn't take long for word of mouth to get around. I mean, there were a lot of theories going around and stuff, and it was so hard to listen to them when you know what really happened, and it's just, yeah, that's, and like I said, dealing with mainstream media, and news reporters. And, like I said, I had to really ream some ass. One of them was, I said, quit reaching out to her friends for comments right now while this investigation is going. Do not print anything that has not been released by myself or law enforcement. You know, um, I had to have them redact a bunch of stuff and remove it from their websites, talking about how her body looked when she was found in description. And I'm going, okay, unfortunately, I have to know these things, but other people don't need to know those details. I said, do you realize how irresponsible it is when there are children who are going to see and hear that and read that? I said, my
Her children. Sure.
friend's 12-year-old daughter started Googling my daughter. So, of course, she's going to come across these news stories. She's 12 years old. Do you think she needs to read about her face being blown apart and teeth scattered around her head? I'm like, that's just irresponsible.
One of the things that I think for journalists, as a recovering one myself, one of the things that I think is really important is sort of like the core part of ethics is you 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 minimize harm, right? If you have a detail that's very embarrassing or very gruesome and it's crucial to getting to the truth, maybe you do print it or you do air it, but there's still things you can do, right?
Disclaimers, for one.
You can, yeah, you can warn the family, right? Like, don't read tomorrow's paper or whatever it is. But if it's not necessary to the story, and I can't imagine a scenario where those details were necessary.
And they're not.
Yeah, like what's the purpose, right? It doesn't get you closer to the truth. And I think people just forget that sometimes. And I think sometimes it's really good for a lot of journalists to get those reminders, like the phone call that says, I want you to sit in my chair for a second and think about what this might be like.
Is that
Or I want you
something
to
you
think
want
about the
your child
kids.
reading or hearing?
Right.
Is
Or if
that
it
what
were about
you
you.
want to read or hear about if it's your child it happens to?
Right. Or your mom or
Any loved one.
yeah. How
Or
long did it take for there to be an arrest?
I honestly don't remember exactly. I know it was before her funeral, but the days just kind of blurred. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it was approximately a week, maybe
Hmm.
2. Um,
So it was pretty quick in the grand
yeah,
scheme
it
of
took them
things.
time, but they did find him. Um, and like I said, so many of those days just kind of blurred together because I wasn't sleeping. And I'm trying to deal with the investigation and the detectives, and like I said, the media and trying to keep my family up to date on everything and waiting for her body to be released so we could plan her funeral. Um, so much going on at once that a lot of it is a blur. And I know we had to give special permission for certain tests to be done on her because it would destroy that part of her body. So we wouldn't get that cremated with the rest of her. And, it was, so it was a lot.
Yeah. And it took a minute to get to the point where, the court proceedings really kicked and went underway. Um, you know,
The
it may
delays,
feel for,
constant delays.
yeah. What was that period like?
That was hell. You're stuck in a limbo, just waiting. You just and most of the delays were just ridiculous, and how the judge kept granting them. I still don't understand it. I mean, over their personal lives and stuff like that, it's like
You mean the attorneys?
the attorney's personal lives. Oh, well, now I'm gonna we set a pretrial date. 6 months from a different date, and all of a sudden he couldn't do it. The day before, we're notified he can't do it, you know? One of them is set, we have a date set, and all of a sudden "Oh, well, I have to have surgery." I'm like, "That's 4 months away. Out of all the days you could have that surgery, you had to pick that day?" And obviously, it's not a emergent thing that's
If it's 4 months
gonna
out, yeah,
save your
probably not.
life when it's 4 months away, you know? I mean, it was so frustrating, and
I think when you work in the system, right? You're a lawyer or you're somehow in the system, criminal justice system, it's easy to forget that when you have a murder or rape or some other violent crime, it's easy to forget that for someone involved in this was the worst day of their life.
uh,
And I think when you lose sight of that, you it just runs the risk. Going back to our point about journalists of creating unnecessary harm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, you're stuck in a limbo, and you can't even continue the grieving process because 'cause you're stuck.
Right. And so the trial finally came toward the end of last year. And I know that there were a lot of pretrial motions and attempts to get different things excluded. And I've always wondered what it's like for a family member, because as an outsider, right? You know, I might be able to look at a defense attorney's motion and be like, that's going nowhere. And then just sort of dismiss it from my hat. But if I were a family member, even if there was a 0.05% chance they might be successful, it must be nerve-wracking on some levels.
Everything was nerve-wracking. Everything was. It was so stressful through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And, the defense attorneys definitely didn't make it any better. They were literally stalking my public profile. They were stalking my TikTok. They were stalking my foundation's page, and anything I said, they would try to use as a reason to postpone, and, I mean, it literally bordered on harassment,
Wow.
um, to the point that as far as I'm concerned, they threatened me.
What happened?
They didn't like something I posted, and basically, if I didn't remove it, they were gonna ask to have a change of venue. That's a
And
threat.
someone like me knows, yeah, about zero chance they're going to be successful. But for you, it's
It's another
still,
postponement.
yeah,
The thing they were complaining about was me publicly stating all their postponements
really.
and all their stall tactics. And then they literally threatened me with another one, and to me, that is a threat. That was a threat, and that should be illegal.
What eventually happened with that?
I took down the video. Not many people had seen it, but they got to the point that they complained even if I stated the date and time of a court date. They
Wow.
whined and complained about it. Didn't even bring up names or anything. You know, I wouldn't just saying court starts on this day at this time, and they immediately go whine to the judge about it.
Good Lord. The, did they attempt to get the charges dismissed before?
Yeah, they tried to get them dismissed for something about the Miranda rights that they weren't done right, which is bull. I mean, it was on video. I seen the video. He read them right off the Miranda rights card. You know, they tried everything. They really did.
Yeah. What was it like once it finally got to the trial date?
Part of you is feeling like finally, but the rest of you is dreading it because you know all the stuff that's coming. You know, them trying to turn her into some sort of demon. Um, you know, blaming her, the victim blaming thing. Um, knowing the photos I'm about to see. Thankfully, the prosecutors were very understanding and let me see them beforehand. So I'm not seeing them for the first time in a courtroom. I told them, I says, "You don't want me to see them for the first time in a courtroom. I cannot promise you that I will behave myself."
Right.
They told me I'm fiery, but I think that was just a nice way to saying I'm a little nuts.
I think we'd all be nuts in that situation.
But
Right.
and you think that seeing those photos over and over again, that it would be a little easier to see each time, but it was like it was worse each time.
Well, I imagine, yeah. It's complicated because I think our shock sometimes protects us, like it's a protective mechanism. And the more we expose ourselves, sometimes the easier it becomes. And sometimes each exposure we're a little bit more raw, right? And there's a little less shock. But I imagine there's got to be an element of it being one thing to look at those photos on your own as they're providing them to you, but another thing to have a courtroom full of people looking at them too.
Yeah, it's definitely different. Seeing your child at that most vulnerable, horrible, traumatizing state and all these other strangers gawking at her like that.
Right. My understanding from reading, so forgive me if some of this is wrong, is that the defense basically argued that, Sabrina had gone with him. They had met, they had gone on this walk along this trail
Train
and,
track.
or train tracks, right? Tracks that ran under the I-35 interstate bridge. And my understanding, and tell me if I have this wrong, is that their theory was that Sabrina found a gun on the train tracks, picked up the gun, accidentally shot herself through the mouth.
Yeah, their claim is that she actually supplied the gun and brought it. That
Mm,
she had picked it up somewhere along the tracks, that somehow she had hidden it there. Even though she didn't
mm,
live in Owatonna, she met Horner at Morehouse Park where they started walking down the tracks. That once they were under there, they got into an argument and she slammed the butt of the gun on the ground. But somehow that bullet changed direction midair and went through her mouth and out the back of her neck.
right. And the prosecution's theory was he either had the gun or planted the gun there in advance. And when they got out there, he put it in her mouth, right?
He
And then
he
fired.
knocked her unconscious first. She had a large bruise on the side of her head, right about her temple, a skull fracture, and a brain bleed in that spot. It's
Mm-hmm.
likely she was unconscious when he shot her.
Conscious. Wow. Wow. One of the most harrowing or haunting details for me was that he left and then came back for a pack of cigarettes
That's what he
that he had
claims.
left.
But a pack of cigarettes was found on the scene.
Interesting. Interesting.
I think he left and then he came back for the gun.
Right. Did they ever recover the gun?
No.
No.
He claims he left it there and that it should have still been there. So somehow, magically, somebody stumbled across this gruesome scene, took the gun, but not the belt with all the bullets, and wandered off with it and never reported it.
Mm. Doubtful. Doubtful. So at trial, were they able to get in his history of domestic abuse and things about their relationship?
Nope. It was all thrown out.
Hmm. What reason was it thrown out?
Because it could bias the jury against him.
So what evidence about their history and their relationship were they able to get in?
Pretty much none.
Is that one of the areas where you think there needs to be reform?
Absolutely. Every bit of their relationship should have been involved. Part of their reasoning is that they were no longer in a relationship. But if you read those text messages, even though they claimed to be broken up, they were still in a relationship.
Right. They were always in a relationship,
Mhm.
whether they were together or not together.
And yeah, so every bit of their relationship, every bit of evidence, every past assault, every witness to these assaults, all of it should have been admitted. It should have all been in there because it all led up to that.
Right.
A jury of his peers did not decide this trial. A
What do you mean
judge
by
who
that?
threw out all the evidence did.
Hmm.
It was stacked in his favor.
And he was ultimately convicted, but not convicted of the top charge?
Right.
Yeah. Have any of the jurors talked about it?
Not that I know of, and I really
Yeah.
haven't looked into it to see if they have.
Yeah.
I know
Because
one of them, she obviously was very upset, and I honestly don't think she agreed with the decision. I don't think she did. She did end up coming to sentencing, and I didn't speak to her. I avoided her because obviously I don't wanna, but I I once seen her in her vehicle as well right after, I think it was right after closing statements, and she was very, very upset, very angry. I tried not to look
Hmm.
at her. I didn't want her to notice me seeing her like that because I didn't want anything that it was jury
To
tampering or
affect
anything.
anyone.
But I really, I think she was pressured into going along with some of the others. I don't think she agreed with the verdict.
And it was a host of charges, right? He was convicted of illegal gun possession, second degree unintentional murder, third degree murder,
First
manslaughter, all
manslaughter, second
yeah,
degree manslaughter, you know,
an assortment of
yeah. But what we really
murders.
needed was that second degree intentional murder. That's what would have given him the most time, even though it still wouldn't have been much time.
And the second degree unintentional murder, why was it that instead of intentional?
I have no idea.
Was the idea that they yeah. Well, I was just wondering, like, are they were they thinking like there's a chance the jury might buy the fact that it was some kind of accident?
Yeah. I have no idea what the jury's thinking was on that because I'll never understand how you can put the barrel of a gun in somebody's mouth and pull the trigger without fully intending to kill that person, without knowing that's going to kill them. And as far as I'm concerned, even the second degree intentional charge was too low. This was premeditated. He planned this. He provided that gun. He stashed it somewhere on the tracks. He carried it out there. He killed her. He left with the gun. This was premeditated.
Planned it, tried to cover it up unsuccessfully. You know, one of the things I had heard that he got an 18-year sentence. And one of the things about Minnesota is there's no parole board, so you can't get parole, but automatically you spend 2/3 of whatever your sentence is incarcerated, then 1/3, assuming you have no disciplinary issues or violations, 1/3 under supervised release. So that 18-year sentence really becomes a 12 years of incarceration and possibly 6 years of supervised release. And I was reading that as I was looking at it, and I remember seeing 18 years and thinking to myself, wow, that's not much for a human life.
No,
And then to realize in reality as I dug deeper that there isn't sort of that truth in sentencing, that it's really 12 years. Like, that's kind of heartbreaking.
that needs to go for violent crime. That rule needs to be gone. That 2/3 thing should not apply
Hmm.
to a violent crime.
Yeah.
Simple robbery, you know, theft, stuff like that, whatever. But a violent crime, that should not apply. They should have to
Right. Right.
serve their full sentence.
And it's a thing. I don't even think people easily get their head around it because they're used to the concept of like in some states you can get time off for either good behavior or doing certain things. This is automatic in
Yeah.
Minnesota. They do automatically only do 2/3 and then 1/3. And I actually I see your argument for like lesser crimes. Why not? Right? You know, it may give a person the safe way to rebuild their life, but it feels like with something like this, like a almost 20-year sentence, to have a third of it under supervised release.
He was under supervised probation when he killed her. He clearly doesn't care about being on parole or probation.
Right. Right.
He violated his parole many times. He violated his probation many times. Nothing was ever done about it. He didn't care, and they never gave him any consequences for it.
Yeah. You know, one of the things you've been doing with your foundation has been working on domestic violence awareness. You had mentioned to me too that like there's some laws and procedures that probably need to change. What kinds of reforms do you think beyond sort of like educating people? Um, what kind of reforms do you think are needed? And then in thinking about the educating people, is there like any message or key messages you would want people whose loved ones are struggling like this want them to know?
Things that need to change. One is violent crime needs to be taken more seriously. You know, yes, there's a mental health crisis in the United States, but mental health is getting the blame for everything. Well, I'm sorry, lots of people have mental health issues. They don't kill people. It's being used as an excuse, and that needs to stop. Oh, it's okay because he was bipolar. Well, you know what? Guess what? I'm bipolar. I don't kill people because I'm mad or because they hurt my feelings. You know, we need to end bail for violent crimes. We need to stop coddling criminals, especially violent criminals. It, this it's this soft touch obviously isn't working. It's just getting worse. And we need to go back to 3 strikes and you're out. I don't understand. I don't understand it, and then I get people who, they try to use this comparison. Well, apparently you must never speed or do this. Yeah, I do. I speed. And guess what? If I get caught, I deserve the ticket that I'm going to get. And you know what? I'll accept the ticket, tell the officer to have a nice day and to be safe, and I'm going to go pay my fine. Because I broke the law, I was speeding, I deserved it. I'm not going to go in front of some judge and whine about it going, "Oh, but I have a mental health disorder." No, I know speeding is wrong. I still did it.
Well, and I think, when you look at sort of like the mental health crisis, I mean, there are like a couple things that we know, which is interesting about the point that you make about bipolar. We actually know that people with mental health problems are way more likely to be victims of crimes of other people, particularly violent crime, um, than they are to be perpetrators of it. We also know, I think, pretty fairly that just living in society in general, there are moments where people are going to struggle because of their mental illness to fit in, or, they may get involved in, some kind of criminal activity. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that, and I think this is a part for people to remember, that even when we have somebody who's truly insane, like legally insane by that,
Mhm.
but where they are incapable of telling the right from wrong in the moment that they committed the crime, or some other factor that the state considers in that equation, we still do take them out of circulation.
Yeah.
right? We put them in mental health hospitals. God forbid you end up in North Carolina where you're not going to get out until somebody says you're sane. Um, in North Carolina is wild because you could spend a lifetime for like a minor crime. Um, so I think they're a little extreme on the equation, but we still, if you think about like, why do we sentence people? We sentence people to punish them, right? And,
At
somebody's impaired
consequences.
mental, yeah, impaired mental consequence capacity may play a role in that. But we also sentence people to give them an opportunity to rehabilitation. We sentence them for retribution, right, to balance the scales of justice. And we also sentence them to incapacitate them so they can't do harm. And, even whatever reason leads you to do something, if there's a potential danger to the community because of you, it makes sense to me, whether it's through a locked ward or through a jail, that you're pulled out of circulation to try and get things right or help you learn the lessons or whatever it is, or for some people, spend the rest of your life. And you can spend the rest of your life trying to do good within the walls of a prison if you so choose to do it. Um, I I don't know what you think about this, but I tend to think, whatever reasons aside, like part of the reason why we don't give people long sentences, part of the reasons I think our whole schema of sentencing, we're not looking at all four of those factors very well. But I think part of it is like people just don't want to pay for it. They just don't want to build jails. They don't want to pay the taxpayer dollars. Like everybody, if I went down the
Well, we're
hallway
paying them
around me,
anyway. We're paying that
yes,
money anyway because we're constantly rearresting the same offenders.
and there are these hidden costs. And actually, if I walked around my neighborhood, I bet, and I said to everybody, "Hey, if we could incarcerate more criminals, would you be willing to pay for more jails?" They'd probably say yes, right? Most of them would say yes, and a handful of them would be like, "And build mental health facilities." But I think when people get to the ballot box, right, like they struggle with doing it, but what they don't see is exactly what you're getting at. And somebody gave me. I was talking to some people at a native reservation, and they were saying to me, "Oh, when it comes to violent crime, it's like 4% of our criminal population does like 80% of the crime. So if we can put that 4% away,
80% of the
uh,
crime is done.
yeah, it will save us so much." And people don't think of the cascading effect too, right? Like the therapy that has to come for the victims or for their families, the cost of these repeated trials over and over
Mhm.
again, et
For
cetera,
the
et
same
cetera.
person.
Yeah,
We call it the revolving door at the courthouse.
yeah. Frequent flyers.
Yeah. It's at what point do you say, "Okay, that's it. You're clearly not gonna change. You're done. You're out of society. You're done."
For you, like I think a lot of us haven't experienced a loss like this. And there's probably a tremendous gulf between sort of like the audience for your message and the actual anguish, right? That can make it, and that gulf can make it really hard for us to remember that they're real people, like carrying the weight, like long after the headlines fade. And I'm wondering for you, like having been through this process and losing your daughter and going through the criminal justice system and there being a conviction, like as you're on the journey after those headlines fail and you think about like other people who have walked in your shoes, what do you hope for yourself and what do you hope for those families?
That we can find a way to make change so it doesn't happen to another family. And I think a big part of that is getting the violent criminals off the streets. No, they gotta quit giving so many chances. Quit giving them a little slap on the wrist. Quit saying, "Please don't do that again," and letting them go.
Do you think that if people had addressed Jason's other domestic violence incidents, whether it was with Sabrina or some of the other women or some of the other crimes, do you think she would
She
still
would
be here?
definitely still be here. The state of Minnesota is partially to blame for my daughter's death. Because had they done their jobs and gotten him off the streets when they should have, if they had convicted him, if they had stopped with the plea deals, stopped giving him all these agreements and lower charges, he'd have been off the streets long ago and my daughter would still be here. And the system, it's not just my daughter. I look at what happened to the little 2-year-old boy in Austin who was beaten to death just weeks after what happened to my daughter. This was a guy with multiple violent crimes of abuse on women, and he was on supervised probation. He violated that multiple times. It was just extended the probation. Well, clearly he don't care about being on probation. He keeps violating it. You know, that little boy should still be here. Austin Navarro should have been taken off the streets long before that little boy died. You know, it's almost every single domestic homicide that I have investigated and looked into the criminal past of the perpetrator, this was a person with a long list of violent crimes and escalating each time. But nothing was done. They were given plea agreements and plea deals for lesser charges or charges dropped.
It sounds like you're going to take your advocacy, in the domestic violence direction and also criminal justice reform direction. And I think it's important to have voices like yours at the table because it helps the rest of us understand and know what to fight for and advocate for. What are for you, the next steps in the journey?
I need to, I'm going to start reaching out to some of our legislators, to the Sentencing Guideline Board. I would like to start another petition for more laws. Sabrina's sister, Serenity, started Sabrina's Law. Basically, I'm just going to kind of dumb it down some, is so stuff like what happened during my daughter's trial doesn't happen again, which was having all that evidence thrown out. Evidence of their relationship should have all been there. And Sabrina's Law is what would allow that in future trials. So it's a very, very important law. So anybody listening, look up Sabrina's Law. Definitely, this is something we need to advocate for because so much evidence that was crucial was thrown out and it should have been allowed. So that's one of the things that I've been advocating for. But I wasn't the one who started that, and I need to make that clear. And I really had nothing to do with it. It was Sabrina's sister who started that and has been pushing that. And I'm so glad she did. We need, I know another state did this, and I don't remember off the top of my head which state it was, but it's a domestic abuser registry. We need that. We need that in every state. Something where you can Google somebody's name or look up their name on this website and see, are they an abuser? Do they have a past history? You're going on a first date with somebody. You want to know what that background is. Find out before that first date. I always recommend any woman, you're on a first date or you meet a guy for the first time, look them up on the MCRO site and look at their past criminal history. Unfortunately, things like orders of protections and DANCOs and stuff are not on there, and they should be. The only time they show up is if there's a violation on it.
I think it was Tennessee, and it was Savannah's Law, and it basically lists anyone who has 2 or more convictions for domestic violence offenses, and it's publicly searchable. I think Mississippi introduced legislation that is likely to pass this year too, that gives you even more detail than just your repeat offenders. So it sounds like there's an opportunity there too for an expansion of that. I mean, there are those whole websites, like the websites that exist that are like websites for women where you want to throw a picture of your new boyfriend to make sure he's not dating someone else, or what
Mhm.
other things are like that. And unfortunately, those two have become the places where people try and figure out, like, is somebody abusive? There should be avenues for people to find out these kinds of things. And, state by state, what you can find out is very different. Like where I am in Virginia, if you get charged with something, even if you're not convicted, it's a fingertip away. But then I go to other states and, like, I need a library card, an excavator, and
You're
a couple
digging in a
subpoenas
rabbit
to figure
hole and
out.
you're about to get
Yeah.
lost.
Right. Yeah. It becomes really, really, really difficult.
The thing is, though, you have to be very careful with, like, those more personal websites, like the one you were talking about, Are We Dating the Same Guy?
Mhm.
Because it is very easy for somebody who is just very angry to slander
Oh, yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
on them. That's why we need this to be a more government ran
Oh,
type
yeah.
thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
registry type thing, because you do a personal website like that, and it is very easy to slander somebody who's actually innocent.
Right. Right. And I think, yeah, right. Having it in a structured way where the data is reliable and you can get reliable information is really important. And I think, things where it's more crowdsourced only simply exist, but they're a tip off that you have a need for something. A great thing is that Minnesota is one of the largest groups of listeners. So we'll put a link in the show notes to the foundation, and anything else you think would be helpful. I'm sure there are people who would advocate um, right alongside with you, and even people who are um, outside of the state. Um, I wanted to ask you just one more thing before we close. Just a little bit about, like, on your journey and your healing. I'm curious about what it's been like and what advice you would have for the other moms who are out there right now where, you know, no domestic violence is going to, like, save their daughter and the other moms, or no law is going to save them because they've already lost their child. Like, do you have any thoughts for them on healing?
It's difficult because I haven't healed. I'm very much a different person than I was before this happened. Anybody who knows who I was before and who I am now will tell you I'm very, very different. Um, I actually just hung out with an old friend of mine the other day, and he asked what I wanted to drink, and I said, "Water." He goes, "Oh, you quit drinking?" I says, "No, I just don't do it much anymore." Not even in my free time, not on weekends. Even sometimes when I go out with friends, I stick with water. Um, I just I and I rarely ever go out with friends anymore. I go to work and I stay home. It's hard because it changes who you are as a person. It changes how you view the world. A big piece of who you are is buried with your child. As you said, it's you bury a piece of yourself. And I do say, get grief counseling. Um, it definitely helped me. Um, talk about the good times with your child, the things you enjoyed. Talk about their quirks. Sabrina, I still giggle. Sabrina, for her 1 year sobriety and Christmas gift, because they both kind of landed at the same time, I bought her a bearded dragon that she really wanted one. She named him Oink.
That's a good one.
So it's a bearded dragon
A
named
bearded dragon
Oink.
with pig name. Right.
Named Oink. Yeah. He now lives with my
Mhm.
sister and her kids, and
Oh.
they take very good care of him and they really enjoy him. But but remembering those things, um, try to talk about them, and grief groups, stuff like that help. Find purpose. For
Yeah.
me, my purpose has been advocacy and hopefully, changing some laws and such, but and helping anybody I can to get out of these situations. That has been my purpose, but also work. I dove into work and I love my job, and my job helps protect vulnerable adults.
Mm.
And I'm there. I can advocate for vulnerable adults in many ways, not just, any type of domestic abuse, but anything that happens in their life. So, um, you got to find a purpose and you got to find a reason to keep moving forward. That has probably been my biggest help.
That's awesome. Well, thanks. I appreciate you taking the time to talk. And I really think a lot of this can be really helpful for people, thinking about domestic violence, but also thinking about advocacy and just, I hope, thinking about what it's like, whether you're a lawyer or a prosecutor or a police officer or social worker, just thinking a little bit a lot about what it's like to be in the shoes of somebody who's walking down your difficult path. And I know that there is something very unique about losing your child, but I think that the one thing as people that we share in common is that we suffer. And one of the beauties of suffering, which is really weird to think of, one of the beauties of suffering is that it really lets us love people more deeply. And so when I think about your other daughter and I think about your advocacy, it's a gift of love, right? That's coming out of the ashes. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me and Stacia for this episode. If you haven't had the chance to listen to the first one, I suggest you go back and listen. If you would like to join us for more discussions with us and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, and to support the podcast, you can join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. If you're interested in true crime, you can join us at the True Crime Times on Substack. It's a publication co-edited by me and Brett and Alice from the Prosecutors Podcast. There we explore all sorts of true crime stories, trying to look at them through an ethical lens. I think you'd really enjoy it. I've also started my own Substack called The Center Holds. The name sort of speaks for itself, but it's really about holding the center, the things that connect us as community, and the importance of that. You can also go to substack.com and search for The Center Holds to find it. I hope you check it out. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. We'll see you guys all again soon.